Questions for reflection. In our first reading from the second chapter of the second book of Kings, we heard a portion of the beautiful commissioning of Elisha by the prophet Elijah, and the Lord's taking the great prophet Elijah in a chariot of fire by a whirlwind into heaven. Before that marvelous translation of this great messianic prophet into heaven, his disciple Elisha is asked, "Ask what I shall do for you before I am taken from you." Elisha asked for a double portion of his spirit. In Deuteronomy 21:17, we read that the eldest son inherited a double portion of his father's property, and Elisha saw himself as the spiritual son of Elijah, and his request was granted. The spirit of Elijah rested on Elisha, and he performed miracles and carried on a prophetic ministry to Israel. As for Elijah, we will see him again in the gospel on the Mount of Transfiguration along with Moses, appearing with the transfigured Jesus Christ in the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 17. And after the Father speaks these words, and I quote, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased, listen to him," only Jesus was visible to the apostles. Jesus is the fulfillment of the law which came through Moses and all the prophets, Elijah being seen as the chief among them. In our responsorial psalm, David proclaims, "Be brave, take heart, all who put your hope in Yahweh." Have we put our hope in the Lord? When we do, He can and He will accomplish His great works through us. How do we do that? By communicating with Him. Without prayer, we simply cannot grow in a relationship with the Lord. How are we doing? How much time have we spent communicating with the Lord today? In the gospel portion we heard for today's Holy Mass, Jesus is cautioning against religious hypocrisy. In this particular portion of his instruction, he's zeroing in on public shows of piety which are oriented not toward genuine worship of God, but for recognition by others. The participants' own ego-driven desire to be seen as holy or pious. Jesus says, "Be careful not to parade your uprightness in public to attract attention. Otherwise, you will lose all reward from your Father in heaven." Jesus is not opposing public worship. In fact, it's a vital part of the Christian life and always has been. But it must be sincere and flow out of a genuine hunger for communion with the Lord. Public prayer is fueled by personal prayer. The regular practice of personal prayer leads us into an ongoing communion, a dialogue with the living God. Personal prayer becomes our fuel, the wind in our sails, helping us to navigate the waters of daily life. We can make no progress in the Christian life if we do not pray, personally and intimately. It brings us into a relationship with the Lord. When we were baptized into Jesus Christ, we were invited to live our lives in Him by living them in His mystical body, the church, of which we became members. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 27. We need the Holy Spirit to respond to that ongoing invitation, and the Lord gives the Holy Spirit to those who pray. The intimate communion with the Father the disciples witnessed when they came upon Jesus in personal prayer is to become our experience. We are adopted sons and daughters of, quote, His Father and our Father, and those are His words in John 20. We're to pray as Jesus did. In fact, when we're fully yielded to Jesus and guided by the Holy Spirit, He continues His communion with the Father through us. We're caught up in prayer, and we begin to understand what the Apostle Peter meant when he told the early Christians that we are partakers of the divine nature.